Hi, I'm Albany Archer. I'm an indie author who writes small town, sweet and spicy romances. Think Hallmark-After-Dark.
Welcome to Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. I'm your host, Casey, and this week I'm sitting down for a conversation with Albany Archer. She's the author of books like Keep This Between Us, Roughing It, and Wild Horses. I first discovered Albany through her book Roughing It, and I immediately fell in love with the depth of these characters, her unique story structure, the way she guides her reader through complex emotions and decision-making, and journeys of self-discovery. And there's also a ton of romance along the way. So I am thrilled to have the opportunity to sit down with her today and talk to her about her books, her writing, her inspiration, and what we can expect from her in the next few years. And make sure to stay with us to the end of the episode, as Albany has written a beautiful love letter to share with her readers. So on that note, Albany, welcome to the Love Letters and Books podcast. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this.
Albany, I loved your book, Roughing It. And as soon as I finished it, I wanted to do a deep dive and learn a little bit more about you. And when I was reading your bio, I saw that you had heart, heat, and happily ever after as something that you focus on and you bring into your work. So before we talk about anything, let's talk about that. Why are those three elements so important in your writing? And what does it mean to share that with readers?
So when I was trying to think about who I am, who I wanted to be as an author, those were the three things that I felt like really encompass what all my books have and what I want them to have, which is heart, which is that love story element. It is a romantic love. They are, I'm going to say they're sweet stories. They are. And I also wanted them to have that heat. I enjoy writing spicy scenes and they are spicy books. And then they have to have that happily ever after. And so to me, it's just, they all tie together. I joke that my brand, whatever you want to call it, is Hallmark-After-Dark. And to me, it's that heart, but it's that after dark, that spicy bit. And then it's that we guarantee that happily ever after.
Oh, I love that. Hallmark-After-Dark. I'd never heard that. That sounds great. And just having read your writing, that really resonates. So let's dive into the book that totally brought me into your universe. I picked up Roughing It. And for anyone who hasn't read it, you immediately almost cold open into this warm, tender, vulnerable, intimate space. And I know a lot of books cold open into conflict, right? And we meet characters further on in their story. But this was a choice to open a book where we know it's going to end in happily ever after, but to have that introduction to those characters in that way where they're having an intimate conversation, they're talking about the future, and you have no idea how they got there. Tell me about the choice to structure the book that way. I've actually never seen it done like that. I thought it was incredible, and I just couldn't put the book down.
Well, thank you. I will say that it's a controversial. I didn't think it would be, but I've had mixed reactions because some people are like, they didn't understand why I chose to start it that way. But for me, I'll be honest, when I started writing it, I didn't know how it was going to end. There was a part of me that maybe, and I don't want to spoil it, but that maybe it was going to end differently than it did. But I always saw that moment of starting on evening 29. And again, if you don't know about the book, it's written in a 30-day window, basically. But it always in my head started on that day 29. And then we had to jump back to see how they got there. And that it was not an easy place to get there, that they did fight and they did have to work despite that attraction to get to that point. But how did they go from really at complete opposite ends to that point where we meet them in chapter 1? And I thought just the way I pictured it, I always saw it that way of them. And seeing that chapter from two different perspectives, I think I enjoyed writing it that way too. We got to see it in the opening from Blakely's perspective, and then we get to see it again later on from Hudson's perspective. And so again, just getting that kind of back and forth between it, but then knowing still that day 30 is going to come. I don't know. It just was, to me, it made sense to dive into that moment. And like you said, we know they're going to have that happily ever after. And we're seeing what's almost that happily ever after, but it's got that twist to it where at the end where she's like, what am I going to do?
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. I love that it was sort of controversial because I read that and I just could not put your book down because I was already sucked into the relationship because that's what you invited us into, just the most important critical conversation they're probably ever going to have. And that's how we meet them. And then it's so interesting to sort of backtrack and say, oh my God, how did this person get there?
Mhm.
Beautifully done. So, for anyone who does not know about this book, let's tell them about Roughing It. Can you describe the plot of the book and then why are Blakely and Hudson such good characters? And what is it about their chemistry and dynamic that makes this book?
So, Roughing It is the story of Blakely Bradshaw, who is an influencer living in Austin, Texas, who is finding out that it's not everything she's pretending it to be. And so, trolls are after her just the way anybody who's really big in an online community knows that you get the amazing and you also get the not so amazing. And it just kind of actually gets to her at a certain point, and she's like, you know what? I'm just going to do this thing. She just decides that she's going to pitch this idea and she's going to spend 30 days in the wilderness. And this is the antithesis of the persona she has crafted and created for herself. And so she finds herself with this man who is everything that she's pretending not to be. And that's what I'll say is he's gruff. He's doesn't want to have anything to do with social media, but with an arm twist, he ends up finding himself agreeing to spend a month with this woman who knows nothing about anything, as far as he can tell, out in a 1 bedroom, 1 room cabin.
Excellent setup. I feel like their dynamic was so interesting because he's almost de-influencing her and rewilding her, and at the same time, she's sort of opening him up. So it's not just in one direction; it's flowing in both ways. They're both
Yes.
changing simultaneously throughout the story. And what was it about Blakely as a character that just called to you, that made you want to bring her to life on the page?
And I will say this, I love all three of my female main characters, but Blakely has a very special place for me. And again, she didn't hit with everybody. She's somebody that I get a lot of. There are a lot of readers who did not enjoy Blakely as a character, and I think that is what makes her even more special. That she's not necessarily 100% easy to love. She's got a lot of flaws, and I think that comes from well, she's in her 30s, and I think that comes from her both knowing who she is but not knowing who she is. And so as you get older, you're figuring out who you are, and who you are may not be palatable to everybody. And no matter how old you are, you may not know who you really are, and you're still trying to figure that out. And so the person that you might be presenting forward may not be all that likable, and you've got to figure out, is that really who I am, or am I presenting something that I think is going to be. And so I just thought it was interesting that, like I said, I got some mixed feedback on her, but I didn't change her because I felt like that was truly who her character was, for better or for worse. And I actually think that she's a pretty deep character and she has a lot of flaws, but she also grows a lot. And I think maybe it was her job that was immediately divisive to some people, like that idea of social media influencer. People have a preconceived notion, and she leans into that in a lot of ways until you kind of uncover some of those layers, I think.
Yeah, I love how you're talking about her. It's very much how I perceived her, and I'm a huge fan of any space where women are allowed to be multidimensional and
Mhm.
have flaws and just be human beings. So we'll definitely touch on that in a little bit. But let's talk about Bear. Let's talk about Hudson. What makes this character just the perfect person for this book, for this woman? What about him really called to you and wanted to bring him to life?
When I was thinking of Hudson, I immediately, like, he kind of sprang fully formed. I knew that he was going to be this gruff and guarded, but, and this is true of all my male main characters, also going to be just heads over heels for this woman. And that's really something that is true in all my books. The men are simps, and I love writing the simp. I can't help it. I want them to be gone for her, no matter how hard they fight it or how much they lean into it. They're gone. And Hudson was no exception. He fights, and he fights hard to not fill that pool, and also he fights to, like to reconcile that attraction that he has to her, because it is so not what he expected, and he was burned before in that same realm. But I also just saw him, that pressure. In my case, I'm an oldest daughter, oldest brother. That pressure as an oldest child that is kind of just innately put onto you, and how that kind of came out, and that in some ways, maybe his younger siblings felt like they didn't trust him, but that wasn't the case. It was more of that ownership. And so again, he's kind of carrying all these burdens on himself, which he presents out in kind of this gruff, I'm going to do it, no nonsense, this is the way it is manner.
Yeah. Well, he was a fantastic character. And I just love how in the story, you're highlighting the love stories that happen later on in life. And I
Mhm.
think that the younger love stories are so valuable. So many of us did not have positive experiences when we were younger. And so there is a huge space for those like under 21 love stories.
Mhm.
Very powerful. And I think we can learn a lot from them or sort of reframe or re experience something maybe we really didn't get at that time. But it is really powerful to write stories about people who have lived life, people who have those experiences under their belt where they've been in relationships, they've been disappointed, they've been hurt, they've hurt others,
Mhm.
and they're coming together at an age where there's almost a lack of naivete. Like you can't show up and say, "Well, I've never had this conversation before. I've never done this before." You have to take a little bit ownership, a little responsibility. You have to think about the future. So, what is it about writing love stories for this age group that really appeals to you? What makes you want to write these stories?
Well, part of it is that I'm in my 40s and I did not start writing. I turned 40 and I was like, I'm going to write the book that I've always wanted to read, that I've always wanted to write. And so I could not see myself writing someone in their early 20s just because of my own experience. Now, don't get me wrong. Do I read that? Absolutely. I read all kinds of books. But from my writing perspective, I just was thinking of what do relationships look like in your 30s and your 40s, and that's characters in their pipelines who are older as well. But to me, it's funny, it's like 3 C's, which is communication, connection, and consent. And I think that a lot of times we don't necessarily see those in any book, and that includes rom-coms, contemporary, whatever genre you read. A lot of time it's implied, but it's not spelled out. And for me, like, that's part of being in your 30s, is having that communication piece. It's like, yes, miscommunication happens still, but how you handle it looks different at
Mm.
35 than it does at 25. And you might be more likely to run from it and what we think of as the miscommunication trope. But miscommunication happens. I mean, it still happens no matter how old you are, but how you come back to it and how you address it looks different in your 30s or 40s than it does when you were 19, 20, 21, 22, and still figuring your feet out from underneath you. For me, that's an interesting dynamic to explore. Like, these characters have emotional baggage, but they also have emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
And so it's carrying the weight of both. And how does that impact you when you're trying to start a relationship?
Yeah, no, it's so beautiful. And it very much came across in the story. And I think as an older reader, that's why it really appealed to me as well, because I was thinking about how there's almost this idea in the world, and it's especially directed at women, that your story ends after the age of 25. And
Mhm.
I know for myself, my story barely started at 25. And man, am I surprised, even at 35, I was shocked at how things changed. And now that I'm farther along than that, I'm still surprised. And so when you're writing these books and you're almost pushing back against that idea and reminding people that the story isn't over when you think it is, that there's more to come and there's more of you. And you haven't unpacked every single thing. One interesting thing in Roughing It was sort of Blakely coming to terms with her past, which
Mhm.
doesn't always happen when we're 18 or 21 or even 25. And you see yourself and the world much differently when you're a little bit older. And I thought that that was a really powerful theme in the book, too. Just making peace with the things that you've been running from.
One of the themes that you'll see in all my books is found family, and I think that tends to lay into that, and then that's an important one to me. As you get older, you really figure out who to pull close to you, and you find those people that connect with you. And I think that comes into, in this case, like Blakely being able to push back against her blood family for this found family that she was establishing.
Well, building on that, I think another theme that I'm hearing in some of your stories, even in the book prior to Roughing It, which was Keep This Between Us, is
Mhm.
people shaking up their lives and making a choice and saying, I need to do something different and being willing to do that. So, you can gloss over and say, oh, it's just a fiction book. It's just this, but this is how we share stories, that these things are
Mhm.
possible and that we're allowed to do these things. So let's take a look at that theme. And can you maybe talk about that in your first book and a little bit in your second book, how taking that chance, betting on yourself, investing in yourself and saying, I want to do something different, even if the world is telling us, oh no, that's not for you. Why is that an important part of your stories?
So, keep this between us. It actually starts almost in a place where the choice has been taken away from Tuesday, who is the main character in Keep This Between Us. And she has been kind of sent away. And again, it's one of those things that like people didn't necessarily buy into that. And I was like, it's true. In my 30s, even now, I still struggle with putting boundaries up with the people around me. And so sometimes that does mean that I'm pushed into a situation, but then it's how do you make that situation work for you? And I think that that's what I love about Keep This Between Us is that it was a situation she wouldn't have chose on her own, maybe, but when she got there, she found that it was everything she needed. And I think that's the same thing with Blakely. It's like she put herself out there more to shut somebody else up, but when she got there, it was everything she didn't know she really needed. And so it's about finding that amazing in a situation that you might not have seen it in that light until you're actually there and you're living in it and you're finding those things and you're finding that it's making you stronger. It's making you grow in ways that you might not have been able to do had you stayed and kept doing what you were always doing. And again, I think that that maybe comes back to my own experience because, like I said, I was 40. I turned 40 in May and I put Keep This Between Us out in December. So, like, I turned it around because it was just there. It was ready. I was like, I want to do this thing. This is something I've always wanted to do. And why am I waiting? What am I waiting for? And so I see that a lot in my characters as well. This thing that this is a chance for me to take this opportunity. This is a chance for me to rebrand myself. What am I going to do? And when I have it, how am I going to hold on to it and make it work for me?
I think that's such an important message to put out there for anyone, but especially for women. So I know that someone listening to this is going to hear you say that and it's going to plant a seed of, oh yeah, me too. Oh yeah, I can do that as well. And I just love that you're incorporating that into your stories. Let's talk a little bit about when there's pushback or
Hmm.
controversy over a character or a choice in the plot. And very often I'm not a very reactive person, so I can just say that right off the bat. I'm easily entertained. So I don't normally lash out, but sometimes I'll see a character do something or make a choice and you're just like, oh, why are you doing that? And then I pause, step back, and I'm like, oh, it's because I struggle with that, or I want to do that,
Hmm.
or I feel like I don't have permission to do that. And here I am with my popcorn watching this other person do it and judging them so harshly for this thing. And it's so interesting as you're mentioning boundaries, right? That's something that people are so confused over. It's very controversial. No one can barely define what boundaries are, right? Some people think
Hmm.
it's punching someone in the face, other people think it's pushing people back. It's about creating emotional safety in relationships, and that changes throughout our lifespan. So
Yes.
it's so interesting to put that in a book and to meet people where they are and to almost expect and welcome that that's going to be something that riles people up because it's very, I don't want to say triggering as if we're all going to implode,
Hmm.
but it's like it triggers something in you, right? Especially if it's about family and relationships and you feel like you're judging me or I'm not doing it well or I'm supposed to be doing it differently. And I think it's really beautiful to put it in stories and to encourage people to step into that space to even be judgmental, be a little
Hmm.
judgmental about how I wrote about boundaries, or women are allowed to do things differently because we're not a monolith. Different women are allowed to make different
Yes.
choices. So, is there a moment when you're writing when you have that, oh, should I not put this in moment? Or is there a moment where you second guess yourself? And then how do you move through that to drop into the space where you will talk about something that you know might not hit with everyone the first time or the second time they read it, but may apply later on? Like, is there something that spurs you on?
So my writing process, I know that I tend to write one linearly, and then I also kind of when I have that draft done, outside of like fine tuning, I don't really go back and change things. The characters come to me, and as I write them, that's who they are. And so for better or for worse, and I'll say that like all three of them, I can pinpoint moments where looking back, I'm like, I can see how that might not make them their cup of tea. And I do think that we have been conditioned, and again, maybe this is being in my 40s and growing up in the 90s, and it's been conditioned to be nice, be quiet, be polite, be humbled. And so to have these women who in some ways, I think about Tuesday, she was an emotional person and she did struggle with that pushback and to find her feet. It took her a long time. She found it, but it took her a long time. That is to me is very real. And I feel like you were saying about somebody might not respond well to that, but maybe it's because they see that in themselves or because they did the opposite and they were able to stand up for themselves at 22 and they can't understand why somebody hasn't been able to do that. And I think that it's just that whole gamut of experiences that, again, depending on kind of how you were brought up, that may be a really hard thing to push back on somebody. Blakely is kind of the other way around. She made a clean break, but then she built this whole persona that wasn't even necessarily true to herself. And so she's living in this other kind of life. And again, I think that there were moments where I was like, oh, that's probably gonna hurt somebody. Like she's a brat. Like, and again, that's not a bad thing. Like brats have their place in this world. I say that as somebody who has a bratty side. And so, and then with Laramie, she's a wild card and she makes a decision very early on in their story that basically changes the trajectory of her and War's relationship. And so, again, there were probably readers who didn't like that this is not spoiling it because it's in all of the marketing for it, but that she snuck out. She's the one who left after the one night stand. It wasn't him. It was her who did the bolting. And I think a lot of times we see it the other way around where it isn't done that way. The male character might be the one that gets cold feet, but in her case, it was hers. And so again, I think that kind of embracing those, I'm going to say flaws in quotes here. I know you guys can't see me, but flaws and actually making them be their strengths. I think it is an interesting way to look at female characters in general.
Yeah, the audacity.
I like messy
Women.
ones. Yes.
Yes, right.
Yes.
The audacity for us to be messy or to make a choice or to do what serves us in that moment or to try to protect and take care of ourselves, and I love that. And I think that's so beautiful that you're writing about that. So can you tell us a little bit more about Wild Horses? And that was your last book that was published, correct?
Yes. Wild Horses is a novella, and it actually is Tuesday's twin brother. And if you haven't read Keep This Between Us, he doesn't come off great. I will say that I had somebody reach out to me and said, I stopped reading. I wanted to read his book, but I just liked him so much and Keep This Between Us that I stopped reading. And I'm like, just, you don't have to, but push through because there's a reason he starts out that way. And then I will say that Wild Horses is kind of his redemption book. And so that's one of the big themes of that one is redemption, on both sides of that. So it is a one night stand turned more. It is a novella. She's a cowgirl. He's a city boy. It's a lot of fun. It's a quick read. And it is essentially, like I said, the twin brother of the main character in Keep This Between Us. So it's a novella set in that same universe.
Well, personally, I love when we have that follow-up with a character that maybe we didn't get a great introduction to. So maybe not everyone likes it. I love it because I love seeing what makes people tick. And I love that further understanding into what's under the surface. And also the fact that not everyone's a reliable narrator. We're seeing people through people's different points of view. And I think it's so beautiful and a good reminder, even in real life, that we're doing that to ourselves all the time of I'm walking into a relationship or a situation or a dynamic carrying everything that happened to me today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's being filtered through that lens. So the same happens with our characters. And I love that you shared that. And I love that we're getting to see a character from a completely different perspective. And, I'm a fan of a good redemption arc because I feel like that's about the most common human story there is. We make mistakes, we make choices, we learn our lessons, and then we can course correct or we can heal or we can make amends. So I think that those stories are really powerful and beautiful. So I'm excited about that one. That's on my TBR.
Yes. It is definitely. And one of the things that I liked about it was I actually pulled a chapter from Keep This Between Us, and we got to see that same moment from War's perspective. And so again, it's like if you've read the first one, then it kind of opens with that same moment that it essentially closed out her book. And so again, kind of like with Roughing It, where you're getting to see that same moment from multiple perspectives, because like you said, my books are in first person. And so that is a very narrow scope. you're getting one person's thoughts during that moment. And so, like you said, you don't know necessarily what's going through the other person's mind in that moment without it being, third person omniscient or whatever. And so it's like being able to kind of revisit that and touch on why someone acted that way, I think is an interesting read, especially for people who do like to read a series or enjoy reading side characters and things like that. I just think it's an interesting way. And I always wish, I'm like, sometimes I wish I could see this from
Oh, yeah.
that other person's point of view.
Yeah. Oh, incredible. Well, I've really loved this conversation with you. I'm 45, and I feel like I've discovered so many things about myself, even in the last 5 years, but we're thinking about the last 10 years, 15, 20 years. And I love when you're telling us that at 40, you sat down and said, I'm writing the book I've always wanted to write. That really does speak to me. So I would love to know, what was inspiring you? What were you reading? What were the stories that really just got you in the headspace and thought, oh, I can do this too? And what writers are you, I don't know, following and fascinated by?
So and it's and this is a joke, but it's in my bio that I'm an avid reader, and I am. Like, I'm talking 350 books a year continuously. It used to be a little more, and then obviously writing takes up more time. I think the year before I started writing, it was like double that. Like, I mean, I was reading like a book a day, knocking those out, and sometimes more because of novellas. But I am an avid reader, and I will say this is that I actually don't read as much in the genre I write in. I tend to read kind of all over the place. Like, and I really mean that. I mean, I read dark romance, I read monster romance, I read Omegaverse, I read romantic suspense. I do read some contemporary, obviously, but in some ways, what I'm writing, I almost don't want to read stories that are too much like mine, just because, again, you don't want to be. I don't want to say overly influenced, but it's also so easy to be like, oh gosh, I can't say that. I can't tell that story anymore, and I don't
Yeah.
want to feel that way. I don't want to feel and say overly influenced, but it's more like I don't want to feel like I can't tell that story if I know that that story is already out there. But we know that those stories are out there. Tropes are tropes for a reason. And that's not to say that I don't have really great admiration for so many authors in that genre. And I have a lot of indie author friends who I've been lucky enough to alpha read or beta read. And that's something I really enjoy doing as well. Because, again, my other heart is a reader heart. And so I'm also a former English teacher. And so that speaks to a part of me of getting to go through and be like, yes, I'll happily alpha or beta read. I still do that now. But on a personal level, Ruby Dixon is like, I am a huge Ruby Dixon fan. There's a little nod to her and Keep This Between Us. One of the characters says that she needs Bubbles, Booze, and Ice Planet Barbarians
Oh,
stat.
yeah.
And so I'm a huge Ruby Dixon fan. I do really love Omegaverse. And like I said, I really love romantic suspense. I've just plowed through Catherine Cowell's backlist. I love Kennedy Mitchell. But on a given day, I'm a mood reader too. So it really, like, my Kindle will have everything from something really sweet to something young 20, young adult, all the way to dark and dark.
I mean, we love those pitch black romances. So every now and then we
Yes.
need that as a palate cleanser. So that makes
Yes.
perfect sense. Oh, I love that. And, one of the best parts about doing these interviews is I'm hearing about all of these authors that maybe I've not been introduced to. So I love hearing about what my favorite writers are reading. I think that's really exciting. And my to be read list is just out of control at this point. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, what's next for you? What is on the horizon, and what can readers expect? I think we just fell in love with this world you created with Blakely and Hudson. What can we expect in the future?
My goal, my hope is to have 2 more books in each series. So with Keep This Between Us, that would mean Bond's siblings, Charlie and Clary. Charlie is a 40-year-old single mom, and Clary is turning 30 and coming back to town. And then I also hope to have Bo and Gray's stories, and I know what I want them to be. So I don't want to give too much away on those, but I know what I want them to be. And so that is that's my long-term plan. And all of these books are set in the same little fictional town. And somebody, I've had people ask me, like, why New Mexico? Why this place? And my funny answer that isn't really funny is I'm in Texas, for those that don't know. And New Mexico is a blue state that's near me. And my characters in my heart would thrive somewhere maybe a little more open than Texas can sometimes be. And I say that as somebody who's lived here my whole life. But I also went there on vacation and just fell in love. And I just could picture it. I could just picture this tiny town. It's kind of a mix of Cloudcroft and Taos and Red River in my head. And also I joke that it's a kind of a Southwestern Stars Hollow. And I grew up in a very, very small town. And that is one of the reasons I write small town romances too. It is definitely an idealized version of small towns, but I wanted it to be this whole community, this place that comes together. And it's not only the people who are wonderful, but it's the town. It's the location that is wonderful. It's a beautiful place. It's a place where these characters can grow and find themselves. And maybe that sounds silly, I don't know, but I do think of the setting. It is almost a character in it. Like there's a reason I wanted to have snow. I wanted to have warm weather. I wanted them to have fall. I wanted them to have seasons because those things play into how those stories pan out. I don't know. That's maybe a weird answer.
No, I love that. And I think world building is so important. And I think part of the reason, I mean, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but part of the reason readers love stories is we get to drop into these spaces that are not always easily accessible to us. I personally live in sort of a Stars Hollow place, but I grew up in New York City. If you don't think I was reading about this stuff my whole life and thinking, I want to live in a small town, I want to go swimming in rivers and I want to go hiking every day. And it's so interesting when those books can take us there. And so I love that. And I'm thrilled to hear about that. No pressure, but I'm really excited for the rest of your books. So I hope that you will definitely come back and join us again and talk about that. One of the other things that you and I had chatted about in our pre-production call is that I always invite guests to write and read a love letter, either to their younger self or to their readers. And I would love to just turn this over to you and hear your love letter.
So maybe it's the writer in me, and maybe it was just processing because I love this idea. But I wrote one to my past self, my future self, and to my readers. But I'm just gonna read the one to my readers because I think that.
Are you sure you don't want to read them all? Because I would love it, but
maybe I will. If you want to hear them, I will because I did. I just kind of got in that moment, and I just was thinking about not only my past self but my future self, kind of where I hope that my future self will be, but then also to my readers, because my readers, without them, my stories wouldn't have a home. And that I think means so much to me. So
great. Yeah. Well, how about we start off with the readers? Let's start off with that letter. I'd love to hear that.
All right. To my readers, there are 1,000 things I could say, and believe me, the many versions of this letter I drafted prove that. But let me start here. Thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for giving my words, my stories, a place to belong, for picking up one of my books when you could have chosen any other, for trusting me with your time and your heart. In a world overflowing with endless talent, you stumbled into my orbit, and I'm forever grateful for it. Please never hesitate to reach out. No thought is too small, no message too silly or late or insignificant. You're not bothering me, you're not being too much. I want to hear it all. Your reactions, your tears, your favorite lines, your laughter, your questions. Every message you send, every kind word, every moment you tell me that something I write makes you feel seen or less alone or understood is like a little love note straight to my writer's soul. I save them all. I read them when I doubt myself, when that blank page feels too daunting, when I wonder if what I'm doing matters. Your words remind me that it does. You also remind me that success isn't just about numbers or rankings, but about touching hearts, about creating something that resonates, and about being brave enough to share my heart in paper and ink. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being a part of this journey. I hope I continue to create stories that you can fall into, return to, and feel something real inside. Wishing you a life full of heart, heat, and happily ever afters.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And as your number one reader, I'm so excited about that. So thank you for that. Do you want to read the other letters? Do you not want to?
I'll save those for me or for future or and see if I come back to them and how I feel about them. So.
Oh, I love that. Well, I mean, the former therapist in me loves that you took that and ran with it and really enjoyed that. It's the thing I'm most self-conscious of when I'm inviting people on the podcast. I don't want to give anyone any extra work, but it was actually just an offshoot of something I used to do in a support group. I used to run a breast cancer support group, and I would invite all the women as we were closing the circle to just turn to the person on their right and just kind of wish them a love letter, like give them something
some tenderness. And initially everyone was like, well, I don't know her. Like, I just met her
Yeah.
today, or she's a new member. And I was like, guess what? That doesn't matter. Let's just wish each other, let's just say something kind and like close the circle, because how rarely are we doing that for each other? So anyway, a little backstory.
I
That
love
was
that. I
sort
love
of
that.
what, yeah, it really
I
inspired
love
that. And I
that.
just feel like what I'm getting from people sharing this is so much tenderness, and for people to be able to drop into that space. And I think it's amazing for readers, for us to kind of get that insight.
I will say I've listened to the episodes that are out, and I really enjoyed the love letters. The last one I listened to, I think she teared up while she was reading it, and just it was to herself. And I think it's a beautiful exercise and self reflection. Just really forcing yourself to think about what am I grateful for, what am I thankful for, which we don't always pause and do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so receptive to it. And yes, I was tearing up while she was reading that letter as well. So I was trying to hold it together on camera, but I did an okay job. But I'm so grateful you shared that with us. And Albany, for anyone who's listening today, where can we find you? Where can we find your books? Where do you exist on the internet? You were so generous in what you just said of like, hey, reach out to me. What platforms are you living on, basically?
So Instagram is where I'm most active, but I'm anywhere, Threads, TikTok, it's the same. It's at author Albany Archer. Make it nice and tongue twisty for you. And I've also my email address, authoralbanyarcher@gmail. And pretty much anywhere, Facebook, whatever you type that in, it'll lead back to me. My books are available on Kindle Unlimited and on Amazon. They're also, I don't know if anybody's local to the North Texas area, but you should go to the Plot Twist, and they're there. That's just kind of my local romance bookstore that has been nice enough to carry me in person, which is a huge thing for indie authors. And again, I'm out there. If you want to reach out to me, please do. I love hearing from people. And even if it is to ask a question, why did you do that? I want to hear, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that you were able to join us today, and I really do mean it. Please come back for your next books. I would love to have you come back, and would love to sit down and chat with you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can find me on both Instagram and TikTok at Love Letters and Books. And if you're interested in being a guest on Love Letters and Books, suggesting your favorite author, or just want to write in an original love letter to yourself or someone else to be read on air, please send me an email at lovelettersandmixtapes@gmail.com.